Hello and welcome to another episode of Intelligent Tech.
We're joined today by Nic Lane, Professor of Machine Learning Systems at the University of Cambridge and co-founder of Flower Labs. Nic, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to start by telling us a bit about yourself and Flower Labs?
Yes, as you mentioned, I'm a professor at Cambridge, but one of my main passions right now is to see that AI starts to migrate towards a more collaborative and decentralized setting. And towards that, I've been working on areas like federated learning now for a few years. And one of the outcomes of this has been the Flower open source platform and framework that is now being used by thousands of people worldwide to do machine learning in a more federated manner.
Nic, you mentioned federated there. I think that's a term people will want to understand a bit better. Could you talk to us about what federated learning is and how it perhaps differs from other types of learning?
Sure. So the majority of machine learning today is done in data centers, and you sort of basically petition that paradigm as saying it's centralized. And what that means is that data typically has to be copied into the data center where there's the availability of a lot of GPUs, and then learning algorithms are applied to that data to result in a machine learning model that does things like ChatGPT or does recognition of things in images or understanding of audio. And that's the mainstay of how machine learning is done today. And what federated learning tries to do is allow data to remain where it naturally arises in different places. And so data might exist in a hospital, it might exist in government institutions, it might exist on your phone. And what federated learning allows to happen is that at each of these different locations where the data is that you want to build a model from, it allows learning to be done locally. And then the results of that learning, not the data, is often aggregated together to produce a single model. And there's many variations on this theme, but the most common one today is called federated learning. And in fact, big companies like Google and Meta use it for isolated use cases. But what's important to note is that it's not being used right now for the mainstream of machine learning systems and applications and models that you hear about. And that is something that we believe needs to change soon.
And why is it not being used at the moment, Nic? What's the main reason for that?
Well, I mean, I think you'll get a variety of answers. There's some technical hurdles that need to be overcome. But for my answer would be the primary reason why we don't see it being used is that it's too hard, in the sense that the software that's being developed up until this point and the hardware that's being developed in support of that software all is in support of this centralized approach. But fundamentally, if we can improve the software that's available, if we could start to align the hardware to operate in these decentralized manner, I think that we could get to a point where people are doing this on an everyday basis, and that's what Flower is trying to achieve.
That's great. Well, Nic, switching gears a little bit, I follow you on Twitter, and I saw recently that you uploaded a photo of Pret's Christmas sandwich, which is my favourite sandwich too, and it got me thinking that you must have been here in the UK for some time, and perhaps working on things that sort of led you to this space and focusing on federated learning and Flower. Can you talk to us a little bit about sort of where you've been and what you've done in a little bit more detail that made you sort of focus on these areas?
Oh, sure. So I've been working for a number of years previous to being so interested in federated learning in an area called model compression. And this area seeks to compress machine learning models, AI models, in a way that they could run on less capacity hardware. And so an example of this would be that you would take a complex machine learning model, perform some operations to it, such that then it could be deployed onto a phone, onto a watch, onto basically hardware that's has less capabilities. And this is something actually I was doing for quite a while for Samsung. So for 5 years previous to joining Flower, I was leading an AI lab for the last few years of that in Cambridge, where one of the main focuses was how can you migrate these complex models to run on IoT devices, on phones and so on, because that really empowers the consumer, the user, to kind of, again, have control on their data and know that their data isn't having to go to a third party to be processed. And so it really is an important dimension, I think, to where AI needs to go in general as well.
Absolutely. Do you think having heavy AI regulation is important? Do you think that it hinders development?
Well, I mean, my first reaction to this is that I think we do need to start to think how we're going to regulate this technology. I think it's important. It's important for it to be essentially a societal level kind of endeavor. It shouldn't be just the domain of a few big tech companies, but it's going to be a transformative technology for all of us. And so all the stakeholders, in society need to have sort of the ability to direct how it's going to evolve. As to what form that regulation needs to be, I think that's sort of a big open question that needs a lot of discussion. But one thing that I want to firmly say is that open source AI is critical to this, and so none of that regulation should limit the ability to have widespread open source AI development worldwide.
That's really interesting, Nic, and perhaps you could educate people that are watching a little bit more on Flower and the community that exists around Flower, and the focus on sort of open source development in this space that Flower is taking, so that people understood that a bit better.
Well, there's a couple of dimensions to this. One is that we think that federated learning needs to have a lot more researchers and practitioners and just in general people engaged in it. And so that's why we have a very community-centric approach to Flower. Everything we build is in the open. We're an open source community where we have a lot of contributions outside of the Flower Labs organization. We have contributions from companies, contributions from research organizations. And so we think this collaborative approach needs to be sort of built into the DNA of what we build, because ultimately the AI that we want to have enabled needs to have those properties too. Additionally, by having things open source, it means that everyone can sort of participate and sort of see what everyone else is doing in a sense, right? There's no hidden algorithms. There's no black boxes there. Everyone can then see how it's functioning, and then when they want to deploy it in for their own application and their own organization, they can have a full transparency on how it's actually functioning, versus a closed source approach whereby a company might build some sort of tech, and then the users sort of have to basically trust them as to what's really going on.
Oh, it's really interesting, and like a lot of our viewers will have engaged with the use of ChatGPT and maybe other LLMs, and they might have perhaps in the last few weeks been following what's going on with OpenAI. I'm interested to know perhaps your thoughts, but maybe how what Flower is doing is perhaps completely different to approaches that are being taken by OpenAI and other kind of players in the space. You've made mention of decentralization and community and entities having control over their data. Would you say that they are kind of the strong kind of tenets of what you're doing?
Absolutely. I think there's two parts of the story. The first part is that we are part of a big movement that's going on right now towards open source AI, of which there are many organizations in strong support. So Hugging Face is an obvious example of a community building an open source machine learning. Meta has been obviously supporting this up until now very strongly with releasing things like Llama. And so there's a body of organizations and companies and individuals who believe in open source AI, and so we're part of that. The other part of the story, I think, is that alongside open source, we believe other aspects need to be sort of evolving too alongside it. And one of those would be technology that allows people to collaborate when they build these AI techniques and when they stand up these AI applications. And so, in direct opposition, in direct contrast to a centralized approach, federated learning and related techniques that Flower is advocating and enabling to be done very simply allows, say, 2 or 3 or N organizations to come together to train a model or to build an AI system where there can be a sharing of resources in a very true and sort of peer manner. So one organization can have some data, another organization can have some compute or some other expertise, and under federated learning, they don't necessarily have to, say, for example, share the data in the open and declare. There's ways that you can allow the model to train on the other organization's data without that data being shared or copied into a data center. That means that you can have a big, wider participation.
So Nic, what's next for AI?
I think its usage is going to expand very quickly. A lot of the methods that we've seen evolve in the last few years are going to now go through a process where people study them and carefully think about how they can be put into products and systems that we already use. And so I think they'll have a transformative nature that will be, very, very strong in the coming years. But there's a lot of, last mile kind of thinking needed. And alongside that, I'm pretty sure that we're going to see some interesting breakthroughs that's going to even sort of push the envelope even further. I just really hope, and what Flower is trying to do is allow that innovation, both in terms of products and in terms of fundamental work that's done, to be done in a truly collaborative manner, whereby the widest possible participation of organizations and the largest amounts of data available can be sort of brought to bear in a safe manner, so we all have better AI systems, but where it's done in a very collaborative fashion.
Well, it's really interesting, Nic. And one thing that comes to mind that I wanted to ask too is perhaps what the thinking is behind the name Flower, and does it perhaps have some sort of focus on what's to come in the future?
Well, I mean, I think there's it's a beautiful name. I didn't actually come up with it. Daniel and Tanner, my other 2 co-founders, coined this idea, and I think I think for me, for my personal reaction, is that it kind of has this connection with organic, connective growth in ecology and environment, where you see things working together in sort of in symbiosis, rather than having single entities being able to have ultimate control over what the direction of things are done. People, Flower and the environment is designed to work in harmony together to produce big outcomes, and that's what I think AI needs to kind of have as a underpinning direction.
It's been really interesting to listen to you explain federated learning and also learning a little bit more about Flower and the community that surrounds Flower. So we just want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Nic.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Tune in again soon for another episode of Intelligent Tech.